introduce you. Multi-award-winning life coach, author, cancer survivor, a single mum, Josie Thomson is a force of transformation in the lives of many. She serves to help transcend limitations and transform wounds into love, empowerment, forgiveness, compassion, and gratitude. Her work as a coach, inspirational speaker, and guide, not to mention experiences as someone who has experienced illness, death. We had an amazing conversation on my show, Accentuate the Positive, about you dying during cancer operation, and her own journey towards self-understanding and self-mastery. Today, you're going to be talking on getting in touch with your inner wise advocate. In this interactive presentation, you'll be developing practical, applied mindfulness techniques for connecting into the voice of your own inner wise, loving guide, your wise advocate, and take charge of self-defeating thoughts. I love that. You know, it's called the Higher Self Expo, and you're calling it the wise advocate. I think we're talking about the same thing, right? Higher self, wise advocate.
Absolutely. You just had to find a language that was going to be acceptable in the corporate market. And so talking higher self, spirit, with, right, just doesn't work there.
I know, because Josie's killing it in the corporate world. You know, she's talking to the mainstream, which I absolutely honour and adore. I really look forward to your presentation, honey.
Thanks. Well, I really wanted to talk about, what is this concept of the wise advocate? How is it useful? How do you actually connect with it? And how can it serve you to serve more in the world? This concept of the wise advocate actually comes from a lot of old scientific literature. If we talk about what or who is the wise advocate means that you're being transparent with your thinking and you're aware of how you're actually thinking. We have this thing called the brain, and we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts every day, but we're not always consciously aware of all the thoughts that we do have. If we were, we'd probably lose our minds and sense of self, just trying to chase all these thoughts and ideas racing around in our mind. But when you're in touch with this aspect of your higher self, which I call the wise advocate, and I'll say more about that, it's kind of like Adam Smith's impartial spectator, where this aspect helps you to see yourself as others see you. And it's like having a third person perspective on a first person experience. The phrase itself can actually be traced back to ancient Greek concept of a word called Parakletos. And that word means an advocate or counselor who stood with an individual, stood beside an individual to help them manage difficulties and distress. And the Greeks also associated this word Parakletos with the quality of Sophia or wisdom. And in pop culture, it's the inspiration for the talking cricket in the original Pinocchio that became Jiminy Cricket in the Disney version of the film. So the wise advocate that we're talking about looks and feels very corporate. It's more accessible in that space. And that's what I'm trying to do, is bridge the worlds. Because I guess from my own personal experience, I worked in corporate until 2000. And then before that, I had my very first encounter with cancer in 1991, and I was given 6 months to live. And when I had the first surgery, the doctor had not realized that it was malignant stage 3 cancer. So we needed a second surgery quite swiftly. So after that surgery, I flatlined twice. And this is what Karen mentioned before, where I had 2 near-death experiences where I was aware of an aspect of myself floating at the ceiling, looking down at my physical body on the bed. And I had this incredible expanded awareness where there was no despair or fear or freak out whatsoever. It was like this blissful serenity And I was aware that I was here, an aspect of me was here up on the ceiling, and an aspect of me was on this bed, the physical me. And I wasn't overthinking it like with my human mind, but I just had this awareness, oh, fact. But that was it. There was no attributing meaning. It was this beautiful silent witnessing of this phenomena. And I had never heard of NDEs before that happened to me. Obviously, once that happened to me, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind and that there wasn't something wrong with me. So I started reading a lot about it. But the reason I share this story with you is because for me, that experience of facing cancer, facing death, actually tuning out of this life and actually tuning into the next world, even though it was only maybe for half a minute each time, was what set me on the path to finding and seeking greater truths about life and how to lead my life. And what was the truth anyway? Because the truth that I thought I knew to that point by trusted guides were now not valid, because the God that I knew wouldn't have allowed me to have the experiences that I had. Well, so I thought. And so I really questioned everything that I thought I knew, everything that I had blindly accepted by my teachers, and I became a seeker. And oftentimes I found through my coaching work with people over the last 21 years is that often it's in moments of significant adversity and crisis that we actually break open and we find our own truth. We find our true self. And when we start connecting with that sense of true self, we start also connecting with this construct that, for purposes of today's presentation, I'm referring to as the wise advocate, the higher self, the high self Expo is another way for you to think about it. So when you actually connect with your wise advocate or your higher self, what you notice is that aspect always has your best interest at heart. It can see the bigger picture, including your own inherent worth and capabilities. And it's also committed to you. It's committed to your life. It's committed to your enterprise. It's committed to the whole for the long term. So it's not just a quick fix. And so some people often say to me, but how do I know what the voice of the wise advocate, feels like or sounds like? And I always say to them, you definitely go with the sensation, because when you're actually tuning in for wisdom from your higher self or wise advocate, it will feel like you're expanding in some way, right? There's a sense of expansion, and you'll always get an answer. It won't always be the easiest answer, but it will always be the right answer. So if you ask, what should I do about whatever it is that you're handling right now, you'll get an answer almost before you even finish the question. And there'll be this feeling of, yes, I know that's the right thing to do. And then you might have a thought that follows that goes, oh, crap, that's hard. Because it's always going to be the right thing to do, but it won't always be the easiest thing to do. And every time you go against it, that's when you kind of sit back in retrospect later on and go, geez, I wish I'd listened to that little voice that told me what to do. So hopefully that makes sense, that when you're connected in with your higher self or your wise advocate, you have this feeling of expansion. And when you have a sensation of contraction, that's usually your own brain interfering, getting in the way. All right. So, and you'll see that when you have thoughts, the thoughts are the same. So the energy of any thought you have will either expand or contract. And what I always say to people is always follow that upward shift, follow that thought that actually creates that upward shift for you, because that's you tuning into and aligning with your higher self or your wise advocate. Now, the thing that I also wanted to share with you about this construct of the higher self or wise advocate is people often say, well, how do I connect? And this is something that I even had conversations with Karen about. I'm like, I'm not sure that I'm actually connecting with my spirit guides. And she's like, it's kind of unremarkable when you realize that you've been doing it all along. and that you've been connected all along, and that you are connected in this very second, and you start to actually fully realize that, you're kind of like, oh, really? Is it that simple? Well, actually, yes. But it's the conscious, our conscious mind, well, the brain actually, that gets in the way. And this is something I need to really clarify for people, is the distinction between the brain and the mind. There's a lot of controversy here when it comes to science. So I've completed master's studies in neuroscience because I really wanted to understand, how did I survive when countless other people I know with lesser cancers never did? And I knew that it was something in my willpower, and the way I thought, that created these changes and these shifts. But I couldn't prove it. And so I wanted to do the studies. I wanted to learn the science so that I could speak with authority, not just experience, that this worked for me. And I knew intuitively, after I had that first surgery, I was at home having treatment, and I had a phone call from the business I worked for. Was a big mining company I was based in Melbourne. And the HR manager from Brisbane called me and said, why haven't you applied for this job in Brisbane? And I said, well, I'm having treatment for cancer right now. And he said, well, that's no excuse. Get yourself on the next plane and come up for an interview. And something inside me, I'll call it something right now, something inside me at that time said, you need to go for that interview. So I flew up for the interview, and I left Melbourne. It was a freezing cold, wet day. I arrived into Brisbane and it was blue skies and sunshine. And I remember standing on the tarmac and lifting the sleeves on my suit thinking, oh my goodness, I feel well, right? And I wasn't well, but I felt well just with the sun on my skin. Then I went in and had the interview, and they offered me the job on the spot. And in an instant, right, I had this battle of the worlds, right? And I think Gillian spoke to about that, between the spirit, the spirit, the consciousness, and your ego mind. My ego mind was like, don't be so silly. You need to stay here in Melbourne and have your family around you. You're going to need a lot of support. But this other aspect of my mind, and I'm going to make this distinction between brain and mind in a moment because it's extremely important, said to me, you need to go. And when I thought about you need to go, it was kind of scary but exciting, and it was definitely expansive. Whereas when I thought about I've got to stay, I need the support of my family and friends and everyone around me, it was actually quite contracted. And so I didn't know what I didn't know back then, but I knew that I had this feeling of expansion. And without knowing the science about it at that time, I trusted that instinct. So the next day I rang and said, yes, I'd love to come up. And I came up here and I defied all the odds. I have a piece of paper that says 6 months to live. And I came up here, I stopped all treatment. I sat in the sun every day for a few minutes. I changed my whole lifestyle. I changed my whole environmental factors. I never drank or smoked anyway. But it was like something in me knew how to heal myself. And I trusted that I could do it. And I only had one focus of attention, and that was to get well. And this is the other distinction that I really want to make for people, is that, I think you've probably heard the saying, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. And that is exactly what neuroscience tells us, is that if you think about what you want, you focus and harness all of your agenda of your mind and your brain to face forward towards what you want. So if I say, I want this, right? I want this, I want this, I want this. I'm focusing on what I want, and I'm always focusing forward. But if I say, pick something else up, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that. So if I don't want to fail, I don't want to fail, I don't want to fail. Or in my case, I don't want to die, I don't want to die, I don't want to die. If I'm focusing on what I don't want, what am I not focusing on? What I do want. Now that sounds so simple, but that is neuroscience 101. That whatever you focus your attention on, all of your resources attend to the focus of your attention. So are you fighting against something that you don't want to manifest in your life? Or are you fighting for something? And then therefore channeling all of your efforts, all of your focus, all of your resources towards that. And if that's the only thing you get out of my session today, seriously, I am so happy. because it's really important that we wake up to ourselves. We wake up to our thinking. We wake up to the way we're talking to ourselves, because that inner narrative is what is creating your reality. So if you're focusing on what you don't want, which, by the way, is normal, natural, human, we are evolved, we are born to know what we don't want. But to focus on what you do want, you actually have to think and shift a gear. And so here's a brain that I prepared earlier. So if we want to talk about a brain, I can show you something tangible, something physical, right? And if I dissected it, you would see that the brain has a frontal lobe, which is here, right behind our forehead, which is called your prefrontal cortex. That's the driver's seat of the car, right? But right in the middle of the brain, you have something, or we all have something called the limbic system, and we're born with that aspect of the brain. It's the emotional and reflexive part of the brain, right? What that means is all of our sensory information comes up through the middle part of the brain, which is all about keeping you safe. It's all about safety first, right? So we're born into the world having our primary safety needs met even before we can communicate with words, right? But then as we evolve and we learn and we grow, we're starting to build this capacity to think for ourselves, right? Beyond the sensations of our sensory information. So information comes into the brain, into the body. That part in the middle is what gets that information. And then this part decides, well, what am I going to do with that information, right? So here's the distinction between brain. Brain is the circuitry. It's the mechanisms of how we do what we do. But how do you decide what thoughts to listen to? What aspect of the brain is actually kicking in? And it turns out there's very different neural circuits that actually work when you're in everyday non-conscious habitual patterns of behavior and thinking versus when you're in a meditative or mindful state. And when you're in a meditative or mindful state, you are actually starting to rewire the construct of some of that inner workings of that middle part of the brain. And what they've actually shown through science is that people who meditate quite regularly have this greater capacity for mindfulness and this greater capacity for tuning into this unlimited space of peace beyond circumstance. It actually shifts the wiring and changes the wiring of your brain. So you're no longer needing to just reflex and react to what's going on around you, that you can simply bring in that aspect of the higher self, that aspect of the wise advocate, to be able to observe and remain clear and calm-minded, no matter what's going on around. And that is your access point to that higher wisdom, to your higher self, to the wise advocate. When you can actually get into that space, what we call not just mindfulness, but applied mindfulness. And what we're talking about here is where you're not only just thinking about everybody else and what they want and attending to the needs of everybody else, but you're starting to turn that thinking into what's called mentalizing about yourself and starting to say, well, what am I thinking about? How am I thinking about that? What am I tuning in for? And what is the right thing to do in the long run? And when you ask those sorts of questions, you get different answers rather than what am I meant to do now? Because oftentimes there's two pathways that we've actually done a lot of research in. When you have a moment of choice, there's one of two ways you're going to you're going to behave. You're going to make decisions. You either make decisions for expedience or you make decisions for what's in the best interest in the long run. And you're going to have a lot more access to your higher self and the wise advocate when you're tuning in for outcomes with that map in mind. All right. So the wise advocate is a way of simultaneously attending to your inner life as well as your outer life. That's what true mindfulness really is, that you can pay attention to observing what's going on around you without reacting, and at the same time being able to observe your inner experience and sensing what's going on in there. And all the while maintaining this sense of complete calm and clear-mindedness. So some people often say, well, does it mean that you're dividing your attention somehow? Actually, it's not. It's overlapping attention. And the best way to cultivate this kind of connection is by doing a basic breath awareness exercise, which is very helpful to be able to do that, where you learn to listen with your inner ears. You can understand more deeply. You can learn to empathize more and be aware of how you're responding without losing track of what's going on around you or what other people are saying. So, with your permission, I'd like to guide you through maybe 1 whole minute of breath awareness, mindfulness meditation. So what I'd like you to do is just sit comfortably or stand comfortably where you are with both feet on the ground, nice and flat. And just have your hands resting gently on your lap. And I want you to find your own natural breath. And on your next inhalation, I'd like you to just raise your shoulders up to your ears. And on your exhalation, I want you to drop and release any tension that's going on in your neck and shoulders. Very good. We'll do that one more time. Take a nice deep breath in through your nose, lifting your shoulders up to your ears, and then exhaling and drop and release. Good. And now what I'd like you to do is gently close down your eyes or keep your gaze down in front of you. And now just pay full attention to the movement of the air as it enters your nostrils. And pay full attention to the movement of the air as it's released through your nostrils. That's all I want you to do for the next 1 minute. Pay full attention to the movement of the air as it enters your nostrils. Notice the sensations and then pay full attention to the movement of the air as you exhale through your nose. And if your mind wanders, which is totally normal, just bring it back to the focus on your breath, back to my voice, and back to this practice. Breathing in through your nose, noticing the movement of the air, and breathing out, noticing the movement of the air. Breathing in, noticing the movement of the air. Breathing out, noticing the movement of the air. We'll do this one more time. Breathing in, noticing the movement of the air. And breathing out, noticing the movement of the air. And when you're ready, just gently open your eyes. Now that was 1 minute. So I'd like you to just now observe your body and notice how is it feeling now compared to when we started 1 minute ago. It seems like a very, very simple exercise, and it really is, but it's not easy because the brain is often, it's called a monkey mind. It likes to jump all over the place. It's very rarely still, and it's very rarely in this present moment in time. Whereas if you're focusing on the movement of the air as it comes into your nostrils and as it comes out of your nostrils, you are totally in this moment. And by giving your attention something to focus on, you're more likely to harness your awareness into this one aspect of your being. And if you can do this a little more each day, start with 1 minute, then maybe make it 2 and slowly build your way up. You don't need to do it for an hour to actually reap the benefits of it. The more you can do that, the more you start connecting with that inner loving guide, the voice of your higher self, the voice of your wise advocate, because you can hear it. you've got capacity to attune to it. And that is the most direct way to do it. So I guess one of the things about the wise advocate is knowing that it's really about loving awareness in action. So when we have a full understanding of what is happening in our world and what's happening to us and around us, we can apply that awareness to our identity. And then with mindful practice, you can actually bring a lot more compassion and loving kindness and forgiveness, right? Hold more of that in our hearts when we're faced with painful experiences, so that we can act in more mindful and healing ways. And most people, what I've found is when we teach them how to deal with, tuning into the wise advocate, is they feel much more empowered, much more purposeful.
It went so quickly, didn't it? 30 minutes.
Oh, I know.
I mean, your story is amazing. We could talk all day on your story and what you've been through. And there aren't any questions, I don't think. Has anyone got any questions? We've got 2 minutes left. Anyone want to ask Josie about any of her, her work or what she went through? Anyway, some questions might come in. There's lots of acknowledgement, and so glad you recovered from cancer. Thank you for sharing this, Josie. Lots of appreciation. But yeah, your story is amazing. And we took a look at your story, as I said, on ATP Media, on Accentuate the Positive Media. And I just loved meeting you, Josie. Honestly, it was so great organising this Australian leg of the Higher Self Expo, because I got to meet so many amazing Australian consciousness teachers. And, you and Gillian, you're some of them, many of them I knew, but I got to meet you guys through this. So thank you so much. Is there anything you would like to share with the audience, what you've got going on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So every Monday at midday, Brisbane, Australia time, I run a free 15-minute mindfulness meditation practice. So I'm really committed to educating people to do mindfulness meditation right, so that they can really cultivate that sense of connection with their inner loving guide. So that happens every Monday at midday. Just go to josiethompson.com/pp, which is purposeful pause. So I'd love to see you there.